Barron Trump comforts a crying child. What Donald Trump does next sparks a movement. It was an unassuming afternoon in the middle of summer. The White House, typically a place of power and political discourse, felt quieter than usual. A break from the constant whirl of meetings and negotiations, the air was calm, and the staff were taking a brief moment to catch their breath. But within the walls of the grand residence, something small but profound was unfolding. Barron Trump, the youngest son of former President Donald Trump, had spent most of his day as he usually did, quiet, reserved, and somewhat withdrawn. The press had always depicted him as the least visible member of the Trump family, often observing from the background. His older siblings, Ivanka, Donald Jr., and Eric, were all actively involved in the public eye, but Barron was more of a mystery. However, that day was different. He had been asked to attend an event for a children's charity that had come to Washington to raise awareness for children in need. As Barron walked through the hallways of the White House, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. At just 16, Barron was still trying to find his own place in the world, struggling with the expectations that came with his last name. He was the son of a businessman turned reality TV star turned president, and he couldn't escape the constant media attention that followed his family. That afternoon, however, his role was simple. He was there to represent his father, to stand in for the president and show support for the children attending the charity event. But as he stepped into the room, a scene unfolded before him that would change his life and spark a movement, a moment that would define his legacy in ways that no one could have anticipated. The children attending the charity event were gathered in a large room filled with toys, colorful balloons, and gifts. A table was set up with various stations where the children could participate in arts and crafts, play games, and make new friends. It was a space designed to bring joy and laughter, where children who had faced hardship in their young lives could forget their struggles, if only for a moment. Barron walked in, his eyes scanning the room. He was dressed in a simple yet sharp outfit, a navy blue suit, a white shirt, and a tie. He didn't look out of place, yet he still felt a bit awkward. The weight of being the son of a president was ever present, but it was something he had grown used to. He took a deep breath and adjusted his posture, preparing to interact with the children as best as he could. As Barron moved through the room, he saw the smiling faces of the children, their laughter filling the air. However, his attention was immediately drawn to one child, a young girl, no older than 7 or 8, sitting alone in a corner of the room. She had a tear-streaked face, her hands clutching a stuffed bear to her chest. Her body trembled as she quietly sobbed, lost in her own world of pain. Barron hesitated for a moment. He wasn't sure what to do. He had never been one for confrontation, especially not when it came to emotions. But something in the girl's sad eyes made him pause. He didn't want her to feel abandoned, and he certainly didn't want her to feel invisible. Barron took a step forward, walking over to the girl, who didn't notice him at first. The noise of the room continued to swirl around them, but in that moment, it felt like everything had slowed down. He knelt down in front of her, his presence gentle, yet deliberate. "Barron Trump," softly, "Hey there. Are you okay?" The girl's sobs subsided slightly as she looked up at him, her eyes wide and filled with confusion. It was clear she had been upset for a while, but now that Barron was standing there, something shifted. There was a slight sense of comfort in the way he approached her, as if he wasn't rushing to fix things, but simply offering a moment of understanding. The girl wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her dress and sniffled, her voice barely audible. "Young girl," whispering, "I miss my mom. I want to go home." Barron felt a tug at his heart. He didn't know her story, but he knew that feeling, the longing for home, for security. He also understood the weight of loneliness, even in a crowded room. Without thinking, Barron gently placed his hand on her shoulder. "Barron Trump," gently, "I know it's hard sometimes. But you're not alone here. You're safe. And you've got a lot of people who care about you." For the first time since Barron had approached, the girl gave him a small, tentative smile. It wasn't a smile of complete joy, but it was a start. Barron didn't try to force her to smile, he just allowed the space for her to process her emotions at her own pace. "Barron Trump," reassuringly, "You know, my dad's not here today, but I'm sure he'd want me to tell you that you matter. We all have tough days, but they don't last forever. You're important and you're worth so much." As Barron spoke those words, he wasn't just comforting the child. He was comforting himself. For so long, he had felt like he was in the background, unseen and unheard. But in that moment, he realized the power of simple kindness, of showing someone that they weren't invisible, that their pain didn't go unnoticed. The girl nodded, her sobs subsiding, and slowly, she let go of her stuffed bear. Barron smiled warmly, feeling the connection in a way he had never expected. It was a moment that would go unnoticed by the public, a quiet exchange between Barron Trump and a young girl. But it was in that exchange that something began to stir within Barron, something deep and personal. He wasn't just the son of a former president. He wasn't just a member of a famous family. He was someone who could make a difference, who could show empathy, and who could be a force for good. As Barron turned to leave the girl, she looked up at him, her tear-streaked face now soft with a trace of peace. She gave him a small wave and whispered a thank you. Later that evening, Barron's father, Donald Trump, received a detailed report about the day's events at the charity event. The report mentioned Barron's interaction with the young girl, but it didn't highlight it as much as the usual political reports. However, Donald's eyes lingered on that part. His son, who had often stayed out of the spotlight, had done something remarkable. Donald Trump, to his assistant, softly, "Barron's got something special. He didn't just show up at the event. He made a real difference." Donald Trump wasn't known for his sensitivity, but in that moment he recognized something in his son, something that had always been there but had never truly been nurtured. Barron had shown that he understood the power of human connection, that he could lead with empathy rather than power. It was this moment, this seemingly small action of comforting a crying child, that sparked a movement that would redefine Barron's role in the Trump family and beyond. The next day, Donald Trump made an announcement that would send shockwaves through the media. During a press conference, he spoke about the importance of empathy, understanding, and compassion, values that often get lost in the hustle of politics and power. Donald Trump, addressing the media, "I've seen a lot of things in my life, but there's one thing that stands out above all else: our ability to show kindness to those who need it the most. Yesterday, my son Barron reminded me of the power of simply being there for someone, of making them feel seen. It's a lesson we all need to remember." The media, typically quick to attack or scrutinize anything related to the Trump family, was caught off guard. Barron's quiet act of kindness had turned into a message that resonated deeply with millions of people, especially those who felt marginalized or forgotten. In the weeks that followed, Barron became a symbol of hope, kindness, and compassion in the public eye. His story was shared by parents, children, and community leaders alike. People from all walks of life began sharing their own stories of kindness and the moments when small acts of compassion had made a difference in their lives. The movement wasn't about Barron becoming a political figure, nor was it about Donald Trump's endorsement. It was about the impact of kindness, of understanding, and of showing up for others when they needed it most. As the weeks rolled on, Barron Trump's quiet act of kindness continued to resonate with people all over the world. The media, initially skeptical, had begun to see the significance of his actions. The simple act of comforting a crying child had become a symbol of compassion and empathy, a stark contrast to the often polarizing nature of political discourse. It was a reminder that kindness, though often overlooked, had the power to bring about real change. In the days that followed, Barron's life took a new direction. He was still very much a teenager, trying to find his place in the world, but there was a newfound sense of purpose in his life. He was becoming more involved in charity work, taking part in events that focused on children's welfare, education, and mental health. He was becoming not just a figurehead, but a voice for those who often went unheard. Donald Trump, his father, took notice of Barron's transformation. While he had always been proud of his son, he hadn't fully realized the impact Barron could have on the world. Barron's natural empathy and ability to connect with people were qualities that Donald hadn't seen before. As Barron began speaking more at public events, his message was simple but powerful: empathy, kindness, and the need for genuine connection. One particular day, Barron was invited to speak at a children's hospital in Chicago. The event had been organized by a nonprofit dedicated to improving the lives of underprivileged children and providing them with mental health support. It was an event that Barron had reluctantly agreed to attend at first, but when he saw how much it meant to the children and their families, he realized that this was where he could make a real difference. As Barron stepped into the room, a sea of excited children and their families greeted him. He was nervous, unsure of what to expect. But the moment he stepped up to the podium and looked out at the children, he felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. These were kids who had faced unimaginable struggles, sickness, loss, and hardship, but their smiles were a reminder of the strength they had inside. Barron took a deep breath and began speaking. His voice was steady, but his words were filled with sincerity. Barron Trump, speaking to the children, I know some of you are going through things that no child should ever have to face. I want you to know that you are not alone. There are so many people out there who care about you, who want to see you succeed. And I know that you have the strength inside of you to get through anything. The room fell silent as Barron spoke, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. The children who had been nervous or restless moments before were now listening intently. Barron wasn't just talking to them, he was connecting with them. He was speaking from the heart, and they felt it. Barron Trump, continuing, I've seen the power of kindness, the way that it can change lives. It's not about what you have or where you come from. It's about how you treat others. It's about showing love and compassion when it's needed the most. I'm here today because I want to remind you that you matter, that you are important, and that your voices will always be heard. A wave of applause erupted, but it wasn't just out of politeness. It was a genuine outpouring of appreciation. Barron's words had touched something deep inside them. They were kids, but they understood. They understood that there was hope, that there was a future where things could get better. And it wasn't just because Barron was a Trump. It was because he had shown them that even the smallest act of kindness could make a difference. The media quickly picked up on Barron's speech, and it went viral. Stories about his work and his newfound involvement in charitable causes flooded news outlets. The public began to take notice of the young Trump in a way they hadn't before. The narrative that had been built around him, one of being distant and disconnected, was being rewritten. What was perhaps even more surprising was the response from the political world. Many of Barron's father's political allies and adversaries alike were quick to praise the teenager for his maturity and compassion. It wasn't just a feel-good story, it was a powerful reminder of the human side of politics, something that was often overshadowed by partisan division. But not everyone was on board with Barron's growing influence. There were those who viewed his actions as a threat, as an attempt to shift the political conversation away from the divisive issues that had defined his father's tenure in office. These critics, however, underestimated the impact that Barron was having on everyday people. He wasn't trying to win political favor, he was simply trying to make the world a little bit better. In the following months, Barron became an unexpected figurehead for a new wave of social change. He continued to speak at charity events, but his message had broadened. He wasn't just focusing on children's welfare anymore. He began advocating for mental health awareness, especially among young people. Barron had experienced his own struggles with the pressure of being in the public eye, and he knew firsthand how important it was to address mental health in a meaningful way. One day, Barron attended a roundtable discussion on mental health, where he was joined by mental health professionals, educators, and advocates. The room was filled with people who had spent their careers working to raise awareness and support for those struggling with mental illness. Barron's presence there, as a teenager with a platform, was a sign that the conversation about mental health was beginning to change. As Barron took the floor to speak, he was calm, composed, and confident. His message was simple: mental health needed to be a priority. It couldn't be ignored or stigmatized any longer. Barron Trump, addressing the room, we need to talk about mental health like we talk about physical health. We wouldn't ignore someone with a broken leg, so why are we ignoring the people who are struggling mentally? No one should have to feel ashamed of seeking help. We all need to take care of our minds as much as we take care of our bodies. The room was silent as Barron spoke. The impact of his words was immediate. He wasn't just speaking from a place of privilege. He was speaking from a place of understanding, of real experience. His words resonated deeply with everyone in the room, and for the first time, It felt like there was a genuine desire to address mental health issues with the seriousness they deserved. Back in Washington, Donald Trump was watching his son's rise with a mixture of pride and concern. He had always known that Barron was a special child, quiet, introspective, and incredibly intelligent. But what he hadn't fully anticipated was the way Barron's actions would spark a movement. Barron had become the face of kindness, compassion, and change, something that was sorely needed in a world so often divided by politics. Donald's own political agenda had often been marked by controversy and divisiveness, but Barron's movement was something entirely different. It wasn't about party lines, it wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about bringing people together, about showing that compassion could be the catalyst for change. One evening, after Barron had returned from a particularly emotional event for a children's hospital, Donald sat down with him for a conversation. He had seen the impact Barron was making, but as a father, he was also concerned about the pressure his son was under. Donald Trump, looking at Barron, thoughtfully, "I see what you're doing, son. You've really made a name for yourself. But I want you to remember something. Change isn't easy, and you're going to face a lot of criticism along the way. Don't let it change who you are." Barron looked up at his father, nodding in understanding. He had heard his father's words before, but this time, they felt different. He wasn't just following in his father's footsteps, he was carving out his own path, one that wasn't defined by the politics of the day, but by his own values and his commitment to helping others. Barron Trump, with quiet conviction, "I know, Dad. But I'm doing this for the right reasons. And I believe it's the right thing to do." As Barron continued to grow in influence, he found himself at the center of a movement, one that focused on kindness, compassion, and bridging divides. His speeches, his actions, and his unwavering belief in helping others sparked a wave of change, not just in his own family but across the country. Barron Trump had become a symbol of hope for those who needed it most, proving that even in a world full of noise, a single act of kindness could change everything. The weeks that followed Barron's increasingly public role were filled with changes, not just for Barron, but for the Trump family as a whole. As Barron's voice grew stronger, his presence in the spotlight became undeniable. He had successfully navigated the complexities of public perception, something that had always been difficult for him. Despite being the youngest in the family, Barron's influence began to surpass expectations. His father, Donald Trump, who had always been a larger-than-life figure in American politics, found himself in uncharted waters. Barron was no longer simply a background figure. He was becoming a leader in his own right. At first, Donald had been concerned about Barron's newfound prominence. The family was no stranger to the scrutiny of the public eye, but Barron was different. His approach to politics, his compassionate demeanor, and his ability to bridge divides were things Donald had not anticipated. As Barron's initiative gained momentum, his presence at various events focused on social justice, mental health awareness, and children's welfare grew. He was invited to speak at conferences, universities, and even global summits. Wherever he went, his message was the same: empathy, kindness, and understanding were key to shaping a better future. Barron's commitment to his cause was palpable. He spent hours talking to young people, listening to their stories, and offering words of encouragement. Unlike his father, who had often been combative with the press and public, Barron knew how to engage with people from all walks of life, whether they agreed with him or not. One day, Barron was invited to speak at a major conference on children's mental health in New York City. It was a prestigious event, and the attendees included prominent figures from the medical community, celebrities, and even political leaders. Barron's role was to discuss the importance of creating a safe space for children to talk about their emotions, and to advocate for programs that addressed mental health from a young age. As Barron arrived at the event, he was greeted by a mixture of applause and curiosity. Many of the people there had heard of him, but few knew the full extent of his passion for the cause. He wasn't just a figurehead at this event, he had become an advocate. Barron had been working with therapists, psychologists, and child care experts to ensure that children from all backgrounds could access the mental health resources they needed. He had already made significant strides in Los Angeles and Chicago, and now it was time for him to take his message to the world. Walking onto the stage, Barron looked out at the crowd. The bright lights and the sea of faces could have been overwhelming, but Barron didn't feel intimidated. He had prepared for this moment, and he knew that his words mattered. Barron Trump, speaking into the microphone, calm but confident, "Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to be here today, standing before such a dedicated group of people. I'm here to talk about something that affects every single one of us, our children's mental health. We talk about physical health all the time, but we need to start talking more about emotional health. Mental health is just as important, and it's something we can no longer ignore." The crowd was silent, listening intently. Barron's voice, though soft, carried weight. He wasn't speaking from a script, he was speaking from his heart. Barron Trump, continuing, "When I look around at all the young people today, I see a future full of promise. But I also see a lot of pain, confusion, and fear. Mental health issues don't discriminate. They affect children from all walks of life, and too often, those struggles go unnoticed or untreated. We need to stop ignoring the signs. We need to stop pretending that everything is fine when it isn't." Barron paused for a moment, his gaze shifting across the room. He saw the nodding heads, the glances exchanged between people who had been directly affected by these issues. Barron wasn't just talking about something distant. He was talking about the here and now, the kids who were silently suffering. Barron Trump, resolutely, "It's time to make a change. We need to make mental health a priority in our schools, in our homes, and in our communities. We need to make sure that every child has access to the resources they need. That means better training for teachers, more funding for mental health programs, and most importantly, it means creating an environment where children feel safe to talk about their feelings." The audience erupted into applause, not just because of what Barron had said, but because of how he had said it. There was a sincerity in his words that struck a chord with everyone in the room. Barron's authenticity was undeniable. Back in Washington, Donald Trump was watching his son's speech on the news. He had been busy with his own affairs, but he made it a point to keep up with Barron's activities. Donald had always known Barron was capable, but seeing him speak with such poise and passion gave him a new sense of pride. Donald Trump, watching the TV, softly to himself, "He's doing it. He's really doing it." For a moment, Donald allowed himself to reflect. He had been so focused on his own political battles, so consumed with his presidency and the controversies that followed, that he hadn't taken the time to see what his son was becoming. Barron was no longer just his youngest child. He was a force in his own right, a voice for change, for compassion, and for a future that was kinder and more understanding. But Donald also knew that Barron was just getting started. The road ahead would be filled with challenges. Barron's visibility would bring both support and criticism. But Donald wasn't worried. He knew his son had the strength to face whatever came next. The following months brought Barron even further into the public eye. He was invited to meet with world leaders, to participate in international discussions about mental health and children's rights. The movement he had inadvertently started was growing, and Barron was becoming a key player in a larger conversation about how society viewed children, their mental health, and the resources available to them. At the same time, Donald Trump, despite his public persona and political career, found himself reevaluating his own approach to leadership. He watched his son's success with a sense of pride, but he also recognized that Barron's rise represented a shift in the public's perception of what it meant to be a leader. Barron was leading with empathy, something that had often been missing from the world of politics. One day, Donald took Barron aside in the Oval Office, wanting to have a private conversation. Donald Trump, looking at Barron, thoughtfully, "I've been watching you, son. You've done something that I couldn't. You've reached people in a way I never could." Barron looked at his father, surprised by his honesty. Donald had never been one to show vulnerability, but today was different. Barron Trump, softly, "I'm just doing what feels right, Dad. I know it's a big responsibility, but I want to make a difference." Donald nodded, his expression filled with quiet admiration. Donald Trump, with a slight smile, "I know you do, son. And you are. Keep doing what you're doing. You're making a bigger impact than you realize." The conversation between father and son was a turning point for both of them. Donald had spent so much time focusing on his own battles, but seeing Barron take charge of his own destiny and inspire others had opened his eyes. Barron was more than just his son. He was a leader in his own right, someone who was carving out a path of compassion and understanding that would echo for years to come. Barron's message was spreading far and wide. He wasn't just a figurehead, he was a movement. The simple act of comforting a crying child had set off a chain reaction, one that would inspire countless others to follow in his footsteps. The movement wasn't about politics, it was about humanity, about recognizing that the most important thing in life was not power or influence, but empathy and care for one another. As Barron continued his work, his influence grew even more. He wasn't just attending events or giving speeches anymore, he was actively creating programs, initiating partnerships with schools, hospitals, and mental health organizations. His commitment to his cause never wavered. He knew that change wouldn't happen overnight, but he also knew that the journey was worth it. For every child he helped, for every voice he lifted, Barron knew he was doing something that mattered. And in the process, he had transformed from the quiet, reserved son of a former president into a force for good, a young leader whose actions would leave a lasting impact on the world.